Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Word from Tomorrow podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Keith Lettinen.
Hello, everybody.
Keith, we have made it to the end of the whole series. We are looking back from the future at the Word from Tomorrow.
Back to the future.
Back to the future,
Yes,
yes.
we are, and it's been a ride, and I'm really happy with how we're going to be wrapping this up.
I could think of no better way to wrap up our conversation about Transmetropolitan than to discuss the series with one of the creators of it. So today we are joined for a recap of the series by Darick Robertson.
Hi, everybody.
Darick, it is so great having you on. We first touched base years ago on my other show, Men of Steel, talking about the
Yes.
boys. I think that was actually when the first season was coming out, so it's been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a beat. That's why I
Yeah,
couldn't remember that it was us that had the fumble with the audio on that one, which was funny.
yeah, no, we had this epic interview that then didn't get recorded, and you were
I didn't
awesome
know I
enough.
was supposed to be recording
I,
myself.
I
Oops,
didn't make it clear, and it was my bad.
my
And
bad. I'm used
so
to this where it's like I just get on and talk.
yeah. Well, you were awesome enough to come back on then, and then you were awesome enough when I reached out about us doing a recap of Transmetropolitan to agree to join us for a conversation about it.
Well,
Uh,
I'm happy to be here. I really love that book, and so I'm always happy to talk about it.
yeah, yeah. So this has been Keith's first experience with it. It's been my many times experience with it. Many times just in the context of the show, I ended up like just rereading the whole thing because it was great. So we we we're just so glad to have you on because we wanted to talk to you about this really cool book. Keith, I'm going to give you the chance to take the first swing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I do want to say, of course, as a new reader to it, I really enjoyed it quite a bit. One of the
Oh,
things,
good.
one of the things that we when we stepped into this, I had an idea of what it was going to be about, and to me, it was the thing journalism. I've said this a lot in our show. Journalism is a very important thing to me,
Yeah,
especially in this day and age. And
more than ever. Boy, we
yeah,
were watching. I liked it when Transmetropolitan was fiction.
right.
Right?
That's
Yeah.
literally when Case pitched the show to me, it was with the word prescient was the word he used. Like, this is a very prescient thing right now. And I was like, oh, you're silly. Then I read it. I'm like, oh, he's no, this is happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to start off by just kind of like expressing that, like, as somebody who absolutely adores journalism, and you don't get to see journalism a lot in fiction, much less in comics. Um, Beyond like the occasional like Marvel Frontline or Superman Daily Planet special or something like that.
Right.
So, see, that's the first thing I just wanted to throw out is just a thank you for that because
No,
I really liked it. You know.
that really, that is all respect to Warren because the thing we had in common was Hunter S. Thompson. I had read his
Hmm.
books and was a fan, but Warren was very dialed in the 90s of what was going on and was following a few different journalists. And, his idea to create a journalist that lives in the future was what he pitched at me. He just didn't think I'd stick around and draw the whole series, and that changed the direction of the entire thing.
So that's actually a really great question. So you weren't necessarily intended for the whole run originally.
No, it just because the way he envisioned the book originally, there was another series that Vertigo had published. This was going to be for a line that died called
Hmm.
Helix.
Hmm.
And Helix was only around for our first 6 or 7 issues. What changed was that they had this 2020 Visions book that they had done at Vertigo, they meaning the creators, which was really quite good, but it would change artists every three issues or every arc. So Warren originally intended the Transmetropolitan to be a book that would change artists with each arc, and I was going to be the first. But when he told me the idea, I was prescient enough about Warren's writing that when, there's that word again, when I first worked with him over at Malibu Ultraverse on kind of a dog book in there, not literally, but kind of a failing, the whole line was going down and the whole
Hmm.
company was about to get gobbled up and digested by Marvel so they could just have their coloring department. But we worked on a book called Ultra Force. That's when we first worked together. And we did 3 issues of that. But when I read those first scripts, I was like, these are not great characters. And yet this guy is making them really interesting. And this is not like this plot is interesting. It's dynamic. It's got the mystery. There's politics. And he was doing this with a book with a guy that had bones on his face. And, like you ever watched the Ultra Force cartoon? It was short lived. It's terrible. And
I own it on Amazon, actually.
Oh, that's amazing. Another thing that I just like, many of those characters I designed, and like I didn't get any credit. No money. Just, hey, we'll just take that. Thank you. Hey, that's fine. Like I designed Zip Zap. But anyway, and then the most embarrassing rendition of a black kid ever. But I digress. But I read Warren's scripts for those, and I was like, there's a scene, it's kind of a throwaway scene, but they were just discussing something in a room, and one of the guy, but the way Warren described them is like they're having coffee and bacon sandwiches. And it wasn't the kind of thing I could draw to make it clear that it was a bacon sandwich. But all of a sudden I could smell that room. Like, so when I went about creating that room or creating that scene, it was so tangible to me that I thought, what a great detail, bacon sandwiches, and it might have been just what he was having for breakfast and just wrote it in there, but it was a smart detail. And he did that, and it was a good series. I mean, like I ended up having a lot of fun drawing that. And so I called him and said, look, if you ever want to do a monthly book together, please let me know. Because I would be all over that. And he said, oh, thanks. Yeah, I really like working with you too. And that was that. And so we did like this one shot for Valiant that became acclaimed before it went back to being Valiant, called Man of the Atom, which was sort of a Solar book. And I didn't know it at the time, but he was kind of testing to see, like he was Fabian Nicieza, who's a great friend of mine, put me on that book with him. But Warren wanted to work with me on that because he wanted to see how I would handle like talking scenes or stuff that didn't have a lot of action or superheroes in it.
Yeah.
And he felt like that was a good test ground for that kind of a script. And so when he saw what I did with it, he was especially impressed with this big library that I drew, if memory serves. And that made him really want to reach out to me about Transmetropolitan, which was just a nugget of an idea when he first came to me with it.
Nice. Yeah. If there's 2 people that remember Ultra Force, it's me and Case. Like we love our obscure failed comic printings. Like it's probably the thing we talk about the most, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Don't get me on that. Cause I still have a soft spot in my heart for what that could have been.
Yeah. No, definitely some missed opportunities there, but that's just really interesting. And I love that you mentioned Fabian. Just to be transparent, Fabian's one of my favorite people in comics.
He's just a wonderful person, and we're still 100%. Very good friends.
Yeah.
One of these days, we're going to get back to collaborating on something, but our schedules don't seem to allow it. Good problems.
Yeah. Being busy is better than being slow. So
I'm way busy, and I really am happy about it. So
yeah. Well, on that note, so you bring up working with Warren. So what was it like working with Warren? Like, what kind of scripts did he put forth? Like, how much freedom did you have to reinterpret things?
I always kind of hate that question. What was it like? Because it was like working with Warren. I don't know how quite to answer. What is it like? If you
maybe
I can
maybe like how is it different than other writers that you worked with? Is there
I think I just described that by telling you what Ultra Force and reading those scripts was like. But the thing that was significant about working with Warren on that, because you asked about a script, is we had kind of I was surprisingly a tough sell to Helix, which was also being overseen by the same people that oversaw Vertigo at the time. And they wanted me to audition for Transmetropolitan because the person in question was convinced that I was only capable of doing superhero work, and they didn't see me fitting on a book like that. And it's fair. I was doing a lot of Spider-Man and stuff like that at the time, like a bunch of Spider-Man miniseries and fill-ins, and just come off of New Warriors. And, so that was a fair assumption. But at the same time, they didn't realize like my heart, like the beating heart of what I like to do is like weird stuff. Like I started my career doing an anthropomorphic book called Space Beaver that I wrote and drew as a teenager. So, and I also read a lot of underground comics when I was coming up. So, like, alongside my superhero stuff, I was reading like the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers and, stuff like that you could, and Robert Crumb. So, and I loved Love and Rockets but it's Jaime Hernandez. I love his work. And on Love and Rockets was just incredible. And so that's why Jaime ended up doing some Transmet covers. Is I pretty much begged him when I met him at a con once. I'm like, will you please? And he got talked into it. So, I mean, even Yelena is kind of roughly based on Hopi. So, or inspired by her look. Working with Warren was a lot of fun because they didn't want me on the book originally. Warren fought for me, Stuart Moore fought for me, and they said they wanted me to audition. And I was, I don't know, feeling my oats in those days because I did have a lot of offers. And I was saying, which was a good place to be considering how bad the marketplace was at the time. But I just said, look, I literally have too much work just do an audition. If you don't want me on the book, then I'll tell you what. And this was my compromise. I said, I'll do the first 3 issues because it's a 3-issue story arc. I'll do the first 3 issues, design the characters. If you're unhappy with what I'm doing, I will walk away and you just pay me for my designs and my copyright, but you guys can go on your own way with the different artists at that point. Because it's just, I don't really have time to audition. They also wanted to give me a script from another writer for a book called Vermilion that was in the line. And I'm like, this is nothing like Transmetropolitan. So if I draw this, it's not going to show you what I can do over here. And I was actually kind of geared up and excited at this point. I designed the character and a bunch of stuff. So basically they agreed to that. And I turned in like the first 4 or 5 pages and I got my contract like immediately. So I was very happy that my audition was, I was able to walk my talk. But what was really nice about working with Warren at the time, like I said, he had my back and he also said, look, if you're going to stay on the whole series, I'll make you co-creator and we'll make this thing together. And that's what we did. He also began to trust me more and more. So the first few scripts were really detailed and explicit, but as the scripts went on, he would just start writing, 1 sentence to describe a splash page, like give me a big shot of the city, make it loud and noisy. And I was like, okay, I know what to do with that. And then you'd see one of my crazy splash pages that had all the signage and the cars and Brian Posehn cameo and, just all this stuff all over the place. But that was just me. Like in those days, I would just go stream of consciousness. I would just start sketching and let myself go, and I loved it. There was no wrong in that world for me. And I was living in San Francisco at the time. I was, still a young single guy or, I had not married, didn't have any kids. And so I would stay up all night and watch late night TV in the 90s. This is pre-internet. And I would just stuff that would come across the TV in the middle of the night would make its way onto a page somehow, like some weird ass ad or some stupid idea I had that I would like write it on a wall, but it was fun. It's like kind of because I was living in a city, I was able to make that city come alive. And I understood and felt what it was like to be in a city. And that was really good. And then over the course of those 5 years, I would actually end up going through every major life change and living in Europe and living in New York and having my first kid. My parents passed away. It's like got married, like all these things happened to me while I was working on that book. And I did every issue anyway.
I love that you said that you're talking about the city.
Yeah.
We have a question later, so I'm going to jump ahead, Case, and get to it because I think it's a good spot. We, especially myself, pointed out that the city itself is a character in this story. So, like, it's great to hear you talk about it coming alive. Did you see it as a character while you're drawing?
Absolutely.
The personality.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. What I really wanted you as a reader to feel is that you were visiting somewhere. I really wanted you to feel immersed in that world. because Warren would have some very specific ideas, and then other times I would just have to make spider walking somewhere, or figure out what the background would look like. But I always found something fun to do with it because Warren had such a great vision of what this city was like that it infected my imagination. And again, the more I worked on it, the less he told me what to do. And I wish that the deadlines hadn't been so tight, because I would have done a lot more. I would have loved to ink the book myself and really just, put a lot more into it. Although Rodney Ramos saved my ass. If I hadn't worked with Rodney and Rodney hadn't been as good as he is, that book would not be what it is. So no disrespect to Rodney. If you know my work right now, you'll see that I tend to ink myself more than not. So
Yeah, we definitely noted when Rodney was inking and what a great compliment he was to you.
That
was actually a focus in one of our episodes, actually. So
yeah, we were good friends. We still are. Just don't see each other because we're not working together, and he's on the other coast. But I mean, I always like seeing Rodney, and we were good friends. And at the time, we were really synergetic. So it really shows in the work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk about like designs that you brought up that you did for Spider, for the city itself, and for all the characters. I mean, when we were talking, like, we'll start with the city. So um, I was surprised to hear you reference San Francisco so much in terms of it, because we talked a lot about New York, we talked a lot about Chicago as influences for it. But what was in your brain when you're crafting this like future city state?
I was inspired by things that I enjoyed, like Judge Dredd and things like that. So I wanted, but we were really clear going in. Warren was really clear, like, I don't want to do flying cars. Like, that is so overdone. But we can have. So we thought of crazy shit like, oh, there's a certain kind of cab you can take, but it'll go like 800 miles an hour or some crazy speed, and they have dedicated lanes for it that aren't terribly well protected. But other things, like, I just started thinking about the city as a place you live, and things that I would have liked to, if I was king for a day, what I would do. So like those archways you see that have full on stop signs,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's a wall. Like, that was just something I thought up. But I liked the way they looked. So I just thought of these archways, like, what do they do? And I thought, okay, well, if you run that light, it's really obvious and they'll take your picture. And, then not knowing they'd end up coming up with some of these things. A lot of the technology we thought of has come to be. But not in the form of an archway, though. But I like the idea that you do the whole wall so you can't miss a light,
Yeah.
Right.
And that I like stuff like that. So for me, it was like, having lived in a city, and I would observe things. Steve Chung is a lovely guy who years ago would write a letter to pretty much every DC comic. And I remember showing him the early pencils at a convention at WonderCon when it was in Oakland. And he was really excited about it. But we would get letters from him. But I also found out that you'd see like all these letters and all these comics. And I'm like, somebody has locked poor Steve Chung in a basement, and he's surviving. He's keeping his sanity by writing letters to comic books. Somebody should let Steve Chung out. Free Steve Chung. And so I wrote that on a sidewalk, because I would often walk around San Francisco or other cities I'd travel to and visit for conventions, and I'd always notice there'd be something written on a sidewalk, or like put justice for Manny. And I'd have no idea, because there was no internet at the time. It was just something that was going on, that clearly somebody was very upset about it, because they were graffitiing, to get the word out.
Yeah.
And but I never knew, there was no context for it. And I thought that was so interesting that I wanted to bring, that was like a city element that I brought into Transmetropolitan, that nobody understood who Steve Chung was or why he should be freed, except Steve Chung, who loved it. Steve was like, "Oh, that's great. You've made me famous." And so he still brags on it to this day.
Yeah, we'll
That's
have to check the
great.
tape, but I'm pretty sure we spent some time trying to figure out that one.
One design choice that I really liked, and is several times we see benches with hostile architecture. like
Yes,
to prevent homeless
that
sleeping. And you're in
that
you're
was
in
an
San
idea of
Francisco,
mine.
right?
That was an idea of
Yeah.
mine too, in
Yeah.
that like that they would turn red hot at night,
Mhm.
And then I never got around to like revisiting that uh, idea, but I actually wanted to find this moment where there were a bunch of people huddled around one of those benches for warmth.
Oh, that's
Oh,
so
that would
cool.
Because
make
That's such a good idea.
you couldn't lay down on them, but you could warm yourself by it. But
That's
because they
amazing.
would turn red hot as a way of keeping people from sleeping on them.
Yeah.
But then I could, the big people, people are efficient; they'll figure out a way. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was just one of those things. That was a throwaway thing
Yeah.
that I just liked because, again, homelessness is a problem.
Yeah.
And
It
that's
just,
why
yeah.
that's where the cat came from. Was I was imagining that in the design piece, if you look at the original, the absolute number one, you can see the original drawing of Spider Jerusalem, who's one of the few characters that popped out of my head almost fully realized. We hadn't even like landed on his permanent name at the time I did the drawing, but the very first drawing of Spider is pretty much Spider, except I didn't want to do the tattoos. I was resistant to it. And he's like, no, that, and Warren really wanted it. And that was just efficient. Oh, excuse me, viewing public, but I happened to notice something I found the other day, which you might get a kick out of since we're
Ooh.
talking Transmetropolitan. I found this guy in a box. I made this back in 1997.
Oh,
I used to take this with me because I would like to go over to friends' houses and work, and I
that's
never knew where
awesome.
I'd be. So this is a map of all his tattoos.
Oh,
That
that's
That's
was
so
so
how I.
cool.
cool.
So that's how I would keep it consistent. That used to be a Space Jam Michael Jordan.
That is so
But
cool. I really like
so
that.
I thought you'd get a kick out of that because I haven't seen this guy in a long time. And when he popped up, I was like, "Hey, it's my old Spider."
That's awesome. Well, so that segues pretty well into talking about Spider's design. So you said it like Athena just like burst forth from your head. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I had a very clear. The only thing Warren gave me as guidelines is that he was bald and he wore a black suit with no shirt and he was covered in tattoos. That was Warren's entire description to me. And I said, okay, got it. And I like to make Spider's body change throughout the series. So sometimes he's a little chubby, sometimes he's really thin because he does a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
And you never know what, maybe that one makes him bloat, So I try to treat him like he was a real thing. But I thought he would be the way Warren originally described this, what we were going to do. I didn't imagine him having luxury apartments or being a celebrity. I imagined him being on the run. So I figured he kind of shaved himself down all the time. So the first version I drew of him, I gave him like these weird piercings that like were magnetically inspired, that they would hover, like, so you're like, rather than a earring that dangled, you'd have a BB that would just kind of hang there magnetically
Oh, that's kind
and
of cool.
stay in stasis. It'll probably be in your mall next week because I said it.
right.
But anyway, malls. Listen to me, old man, malls. Anyway, but that was my thinking, and that he would shave himself down, and more was like, no, piercings. And he was right at the time, like 90s. It's like piercings are way overdone right now.
Mhm.
And tattooing had not quite caught on as much as it would. So that was or be as mainstream as it is now. I was resistant to do the tattoos, but I folded because I knew that it'd be a lot of work. But I did. And the glasses were an idea that I had come up with for a character for Ultraverse that I lost my creator credit on. And so I kind of took the idea back and put them into Spider. And but Warren was like, what's with these weird glasses? And I was like, oh, well, one of the lenses takes photographs. And he's like, okay, they're weird. And then, so literally the first reaction you see a Spider when the maker spits them out and they're weird looking, he's like, what the hell are these? That was literally Warren's opinion of them.
Right.
So that was kind of a funny, like, elbowing me.
Yeah. Life imitating art right there. And then,
yeah.
yeah.
But then the cat was, I just threw that into the design drawing. But I was thinking, okay, in the big city, I saw a lot of strays. It's the future. Who knows what the hell are in dumpsters? They're eating out of dumpsters. They're having mutant kittens. The kittens get stronger. They survive. You just got these weird looking mutant cats and dogs walking around. And that's just commonplace. But, so I drew the three-eyed, two-faced cat, and he has 5 legs in the original drawing I did. But then Warren's like, oh, that's cool. Let's make it his pet. And I was like, great. So we would do that. Like we would throw idea balls back and forth, and Warren was a very yes and kind of guy, and that made him a lot of fun to work with.
Nice. Yeah, the glasses are like the most iconic design thing I can think of. Like,
which who would have known? Like,
yeah.
I mean, the fact that it turned out to be an iconic thing. The very, very first script of that Warren did, he put a little three-eyed smiley icon on. It was like they called them widgets, I think, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this little teeny tiny thing on the cover of the front piece that said Transmetropolitan. But I liked it so much that I made it like a stamp or a punctuation point at the end of every issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I would try to tweak it so it fit the theme of what you had just read,
Yeah. And that was cool. That was a really great way to, like, especially when you're reading a trade, sometimes it's not super clear when the issue ends, and I'm looking for that every time. And it's really great.
Cool.
Like, yeah. So, but no, that was just, it fit perfectly. So
I didn't know this at the time, but I found out years later that Transmetropolitan actually started the whole collecting a series while it's going trade paperback thing. Transmet was the first, because when we moved from Helix to Vertigo, they put out this first 3 issues as a small trade called Back on the Street.
Yeah.
And that thing sold like crazy for years. And DC realized, like, oh, people will buy collections of existing series just to catch up. And so they started doing it with all their titles because of the success of that. So
that's pretty cool, actually. Yeah.
Little fun fact about Transmet I had learned later on. I'm like, really? We were the first? They said, yeah, because the Back on the Street sold so well.
That's crazy. Yeah, I have that edition. That's why when we have talked about like which issues we've been reviewing, I've been like, well, it's really weird because like initially it was 3 issues for the Back on the Street trade, and then like then they redid the collections so that it was all like standardized 6-issue collection.
It was just that the idea that we would get people onto the monthly book, and which never really did very well. It's very like a Coen Brothers film. Like nobody paid any attention to it when it was in the theaters. But then, years later, everybody can quote Big Lebowski. The Transmet's kind of been like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was an example where like I started with the trades and then like caught up to probably around like issue like 45 is where I like jumped on like buying the monthlies.
We just almost got canceled so many times. It was hilarious. And I'm sure if I had faltered on a single issue, it would have been justification.
So talking
we went through more editors than we kept the art team together, but we went through like 9 editors. It was insane.
Yeah. So talking about the glasses, how do you feel looking at the modern world with things like Meta Ray-Bans and all these like smart glasses becoming more of like in vogue?
Yeah, we were the head of our time. I wish I had copyrighted them. I wish I went out and got a patent. Had no idea that I really never thought that 90% of what I was dreaming of would ever be a thing, but it's here we are. Exactly. Yeah. There was actually a guy that was out in the street. I think I took a picture of it. I can't share with your readers or your viewers right now, but I found a picture of a guy who was doing a review of the VR headsets that Apple was putting out.
Yeah.
And he was out in the street with like a power pack to the thing, walking down the street wearing this. And I swear to God, he looks like he walked right out of the early pages of when Spider arrives in the city, to the point that I put them side by side, and it was uncanny.
So you brought up that they were concerned about you doing a book that was as conversation heavy, and that Solar Man of the Atom was kind of like a test run for that.
Yeah.
There obviously is a lot of like dialogue in this book. It's not like it's about journalism, and it's about people collecting stories and repackaging them.
Yeah.
What were sort of like, did you have like rules for keeping like these heavy dialogue scenes interesting? Like, do you have like thoughts about how you make?
Oh no, actually, I love dialogue scenes because I'm a movie fan, and
Mm.
good movies tend to have heavy dialogue. So I would study film and go, well, how is this interesting? How is this, where do they put the camera in this shot? And how can I use the lighting, or what can I do to make this conversation have the weight that it needs by tweaking, just something in the background? I always think about the first, I think it was issue 2 or 3, when he meets Fred Christ, and that conversation, like, that was a good one to show a lot of I don't know, just play with the camera and make the characters interesting. I also really love Kevin McGuire is a good friend of mine now, but back in the day, I loved his Justice League, and him and J.M. Madison, rest in peace, Giffen. But their Justice League was very dialogue heavy, but it was Kevin McGuire, and then the amazing Adam Hughes, who took over for him. And that was about the time I broke in and got to draw a few issues. But they would do such a wonderful job. And Brian Bolland, my absolute favorite artist, is very underrated for his facial expressions. But and Dave Stevens is another guy who could make a dialogue scene interesting. And it really just comes down to what the artist is willing to do to carry the scene. And if it's good dialogue, you can do a lot with it. And in Warren's case, he was an incredible dialogue writer. So changing people's facial expressions, giving them something funny to do. If it wasn't mentioned, I would just kind of play with it, Yeah. It's been a while since I've looked at my own work on that, and I did a lot of it really fast. So I'd have to kind of go back through, and I always do. And when I do, I cringe because I'm like, I want to fix that. I always want to fix everything. It's like turning my editor brain on fire.
It's funny because you mentioned it was like a Coen Brothers movie, and the Coen Brothers, more than anybody, made conversations interesting. That's what they're
Yeah,
known
absolutely.
for.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
I
So
mean, how much
you
of
said
that?
I was like,
How much of Big Lebowski is about just things they said in the bowling alley to each other?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Fargo is a murder mystery.
Fargo,
It's just people
incredible.
talking to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really. But
they
clicked.
were
Yeah.
brilliant pieces. Just how they got everybody to do that wonderful North Dakota accent.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes a lot of sense. I like that.
One of the things that you did do to sort of make every page be really interesting was pack it full of detail. And you've referenced sort of like your late night kind of binges of TV while working, drawing inspiration there. Like, how did you decide like what to include versus when to be more judicious with it all? Like, there's so many spots where it's just so much information that you're just putting on the page.
That was me trying to convey the world that Warren had described to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it needed to feel overwhelming. Otherwise, I don't think it would have worked. That's why when Spider is up in the mountain and there's not a lot around him, it makes a lot of sense, because the city is so overbearing, it's so overwhelming that it's just a constant crush of the senses. And if I didn't reveal that to the reader as best I could and capture that element that Warren wanted in there, then you wouldn't relate to Spider the way you do. So it was a labor of love in a lot of ways because there was no wrong in that world. And I just kind of like that anyway. I was, I'm very different now, but when I was in my 20s, I just had a nonstop brain and a lot of energy. So it's like I would go to a restaurant even after doing, 4 pages and doodle on the placemat. I mean, it still will, but not as often, but I just had a nonstop need to draw. And so having a place to put all that energy in a world where it was like anything goes, it was a lot of fun. I really liked it. It was, for me, that was one of the happier experiences of working on that book. Also, like the way the script was given to me, I'd get 4 or 5 pages at a time. So sometimes I wouldn't even know what the rest of the issue was going to be, but I had X amount of time to work on 4 or 5 pages. I was a very fast penciler in those days. So I could have knocked out 4 or 5 pages probably over a day or two. But as it was, if I was waiting on script, I would just keep putting detail into the pages I had to work on, which is also what kept pushing me to like, hey, I want to ink these so I can just finish them off and not hand them over to Rodney so he has to do all this crazy detail in a pinch because they'll, but they wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
Every time I convince an editor of it, he'd leave, or she'd leave. So they always kept wanting to bring on a fill-in artist. I'm like, the scripts aren't ready. What are they going to fill in for? What?
Yeah,
like if Warren had like 6 scripts sitting here, yeah, go for it. But I'm waiting on script.
So with all these background details that you've inserted, and we've talked a little bit about the prescience of the world, what's it feel like now with so many of these like throwaway details coming true, and then like the bigger parts about Transmetropolitan kind of coming true, like the world.
I'm not happy about it at all. This was supposed that world scared me. I mean, I used to kind of defend it where people would go like, it's a dystopia. I go, nah, it's not really. You can go get a cheeseburger or eat in a restaurant and walk down the street and not die. It's not Escape from New York,
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it's just scary because it's overwhelming. But I grew up with a big fear of big cities because of those movies. I remember the first time I went to New York, I really thought I was going to be like, I thought it was going to be like the Warriors,
Right.
like trying to get from the subway to my hotel and have to take on the baseball Furies, Then I went to Central Park and it was gorgeous. I'm like, this is great.
Hey, I did come out to play.
Yeah. Darick, come out to play catch. But but I lived in New York for 4 years and I fell in love with that. I absolutely loved living in the city. I finished off Transmetropolitan living in Brooklyn. And it was and then I also went and lived in Florence, Italy for a year while I was working on that book. That was great because then I was traveling around seeing European cities and learning a lot about and talk about the city as a character, something that I didn't until I went to war-torn places and saw the scars. I didn't really fully understand because America didn't get bombed in World War II, but Italy did, Germany did, London or England did. And so when I would go to these places like Coventry, where they have this bombed out church that's left just the way it was, but they've turned it into a memoriam. But the more interesting thing, I was being in Germany and driving down a street and noticing this beautiful old architecture, not even turn of the century, that's here, something from the 1500s, this beautiful ornate building, and right next to it, this glass and steel piece of shit that looked like somebody, put it together with an erector set and panes of glass. And the contrast of the two things side by side, I didn't really understand until I realized, oh, that was where a building got bombed, and they didn't have a lot of money after the war to rebuild another, something as beautiful and as this old building took. So they just threw up something else instead with what they could afford and as quickly as possible. Yeah. So you see a lot of that in Europe, and it was very educational to me because I started to look at the city that way. When I would sit down to draw, I'd be like, well, why does this building look like that? Or what about that building? Wherever I could put something interesting in, I would. I mean, it got to the point where I just had to, get it done as quickly as possible. But that's where my brain was, at least. My heart was in the right place.
I want to jump over to talking about the rest of the cast, since we're talking about like kind of designs for things.
Yes.
So
you didn't want to talk about Space Beaver?
I love look, we talked quite a bit about Space Beaver the last time I had a chance to interview, so I feel like I'm going to point people to the Men of Steel episode. Check that out. We'll put a link in the doobly-doo. But in the meantime,
I know this is Transmet specific. I'm just kidding. But the rest of the cast.
So let's start with Shannon. We love Shannon. We are unapologetic stands for Shannon on this podcast.
Yeah, she's awesome.
So first question I have for you about the character, we noticed that there is a passing resemblance between Shannon and Spider's ex-wife.
That's funny. The irony there is that all of the cast, the main cast of Transmetropolitan, were based on real life people, friends of mine. What has happened, unfortunately, is somewhere some people have gotten it, no matter how many times I've decried this, they think I based early Spider on Alan Moore, and then he transforms into Grant Morrison, which
We
is
talked
really
about that.
silly.
We talked about
Yeah, it's
that.
really silly because one, it was pre-internet. I really didn't know what Alan Moore looked like. Two, why would Warren and I be, fanboying over colleagues of ours? And three, Grant had hair then. So, and it was a friend of ours. And so it was weird that people took it there, but people are going to do what they do. The reality is that Spider was based on my friend Andre Ricciardi, who passed away a couple of years from cancer, a couple of years ago from cancer. But before he died, he went to work making, because Andre really was Spider in so many ways, which is why I'm like, I got to make, will you model for me? And he had crazy hair and beard like that and shaved it all off. And I built him a little dummy pair of glasses and he put on a black thing and we drew on him. And, he is Spider Jerusalem. He made a documentary about getting cancer, thinking he was going to survive it and didn't. And the documentary just came out. It's called Andre is an Idiot. It's getting awards. It burned up Sundance, and it's getting a ton of award buzz now. And it's fantastic. You can find it now. I think it's in theaters at the moment. But the reason I bring that up specifically is, one, you'll see Andre looking like Spider, because that's the way he used to go around looking with Spider in the Mountain, I should say. He didn't go around bald. But the rest of the cast was mutual friends of ours at the time. So Shannon was his wife, Janice, who you'll see in the documentary as well, because she's by his side as he's going through the cancer. But Janice Ricciardi was my then girlfriend, who became my fiance, who became my wife, and is now the mother of my children while we were making that book. And she's the head in the jar. She's Spider's ex-wife, and they're best friends. So it's a coincidence, but it's also funny because I said to my wife, I want to draw you into the book. She goes, well, I want to be nothing like myself. So it was a lot of fun. She modeled for me. So her giving me the finger and throwing back booze. And I made up the turbo smoke for her because she was a smoker at the time. It was, but that's, and then Royce is my friend, Mike O'Brien. He'll show up at conventions every once in a while I'm signing, and I'll go, hey, this is Royce. And they'll go, oh, you signed too? But yeah, and then Alina was my friend Mary, who actually did my tattoo. She's now a successful tattoo artist. She wasn't when I based the character on her back then, but ironically, she would go into tattoo art, and she's a very celebrated tattoo artist, and I have some of her work on my back. But
that's awesome. And you mentioned the Love and Rockets connection with Yelena as well.
Yeah, that was her style. Like, I really loved Hopi's like all black with the glasses and the spiky hair,
I'm a big Love and Rockets fan, so that's awesome to hear. That makes me
love and Rockets. I was a big fan.
Yeah, 100%.
I still think Jaime Hernandez is one of the most unappreciated, underrated artists that's ever worked in the medium, because the simplicity of what that guy can capture with one line. I work hours and it's like one line, it looks like an older woman. I don't know if you saw the piece that just came out that he did, where he recreated a cover, or he just drew the cast side by side. I don't know if it was a recreation, but he drew the cast in the 80s and he drew them present day. And they've all gotten old, they're all in their 50s to 60s now, like he is. But the way he aged them, they're all in the exact same poses, but just the subtle things he did to age them, amazing. But I don't know why I got off on Jaime Hernandez. Love and Rockets, I love it.
No, that's my fault.
It's just he's one of my art heroes, and I was very happy that he did covers for us. And one of the only covers I own is one of his.
So you mentioned that you were young and scrappy working on this at the time. how would you
I'd say
say
young and stupid, but
how would you say your style has evolved from here? Like, are there things that you
oh,
just
that's good.
wouldn't be able to do it anymore, that you just wouldn't do anymore the way that you
Yes
work
and
on print?
no. Yes and no. I would want to ink it myself still because there's things I would just be able to do. I have a shortcut to the way I draw now, and I'm working on a new series with Tom Taylor called Necretaceous about zombie dinosaurs in a time machine, and I'm putting this intense detail into it, mostly for issue 1 because it's a lot of setup, and I'm drawing these teeny tiny figures, and I'm like hating it because there was a point where it took me 4 days to ink a page, and my inking rate is not that much, and I was like kind of like putting the math together like Napoleon Dynamite going, it's $1 an hour, you know. But at the same time, I know these things will live on much longer than this initial paycheck and this first issue. These things will be looked at. I stumbled on a YouTube video, somebody reviewing a Punisher Wolverine issue that I did with Garth Ennis back in the day, and they were like kind of nitpicking it and going through it, and I'm like, God, that was 2003 I did that artwork, but they're like present day looking at it going, oh, that's kind of weird looking, and I'm like, yeah, I had a baby and my deadline was in 2 days, and and so I look back at Transmetropolitan with that same sort of eye, like, oh, what did I have to do as opposed to what did I want to do? And so how I now pick projects that I am very clear going in, this is my process. I'd like to have as much lead time as possible. I don't like to rush my work if I don't have to. I'm hoping that I am feeling like I've earned that right at this stage. But in my 20s, I was just happy to be working and love having a monthly book. And so my old motto used to be sometimes good enough has to be. And it's still advice I give to people that are breaking in or trying to show like, hey, you can spend a year drawing one issue, but if you want to show people you can handle a monthly book, you got to turn it in a month. Did
So
that answer the question? I don't know
I
if I about.
no, you did very well, and in fact, you kind of like covered a lot of the follow-up question I had about
Oh,
like
okay.
the detail being sustainable.
Yeah, I feel
So
bad I put Rodney through that. But what was great about working with Rodney is there were cases where he stepped up. And in the beginning, I think he burnt out later on too. But because we really did have to do books really, really fast. We got a very, very short time. It's amazing that everybody stayed with the team.
Yeah.
But because we would have to put out an issue and like I would have to pencil them sometime in as little as 2 weeks and then give those over to Rodney as I was getting them done. But like in issue 5, I think it was Rodney's debut, is Spider Watches Television. And there's a shot of him in a chair from behind, and he's watching a sumo fight. And I just drew little circles in pencil for the audience. Rodney went in and did this amazing detail on the audience members. Like he really put a lot of love and effort in. And I was like, that felt really good because like somebody kind of had my back in a way I couldn't, what I also ended up learning and why I like to ink my own work is that they're different tools. So a pencil can't do what an ink pen can do, and vice versa. And so and also it's the same amount of time to detail in pencil as it is to detail with an ink pen, except you're finished, and you can actually control. And now that I can scan my own work and clean it up and add effects to it, like that's a very satisfying feeling as an artist to, okay, this is the best I can give you. This is the best I have to do. And I have the final eye on it, but back in those days, you would turn it in and you wouldn't always know what you were going to get. But Rodney was really reliable, so I came to trust him.
that's great. It's you hear some of the horror stories of like inkers like
Oh yeah.
yeah. So it's good that you had a good team, even if your preference is to doing it yourself in that whole scenario. Um, so shifting to conversations about the tone of the series, we've noted that the series runs the gamut between being serious political commentary and being kind of goofy satire. In particular, we use the phrase Bugs Bunny to describe the second major story arc, the Lust for Life, the one where the head in the jar is stolen and so forth.
Yeah, and
Uh,
Stompanato.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like that.
Which
That's
Garth Ennis likes so much. That's the reason Terror was in The Boys, is because he wanted me to capture that stomp and auto energy.
That's great.
what was it like, and what did you do to sort of like control the shifting tone when going between something that's like more goofy versus something that's like a bit more serious? Like like there's the usual like long shot comedy, close up tragedy kind of context. Was there anything that you were like actively doing when you were really trying to sell like, okay, this is goofy fun versus like, no, it's now it's time for us to be serious?
I was just reading the room. I think, for me, I go back to Shakespeare. Like, yeah, every good story should have a little bit of everything in it. There should be a little romance. There should be some comedy. There should be some to balance out the tragedy. There should be a little of something in everything. So for me, it was just telling the story. My main love for comics and my main passion for doing this is I like when people like what I draw, but I really like when they enjoy the story, because then I feel like I did my job. My job is not to impress you with how well I can draw. My job is to make you feel the story, and suck you in to where when you're done reading it, you feel like you've had an experience as opposed to looked at something. And in the 90s at the time, a lot of comics had gone the way of like writing doesn't matter. And it was a lot of like splash page and splash panels, and people that didn't have a whole lot of skill were getting work. And that wasn't what I got into it for. I had come out of I started Space Beaver the same year that Alan Moore put out Watchmen, and the same time that Dark Knight Returns was published, and it changed the landscape of what was possible just with superheroes. So for me, the idea that you draw just to impress, it's like, I'm really more interested in, like, I'm more impressed with like what Dave Gibbons could do. And I'm still a huge Eisner fan, and I go back and look at his work, and I studied his book on storytelling, sequential art, and just the brilliant things he figured out, like how you can make time move, like this drip coming out of a faucet or a clock moving in the background, to give an idea. So moving back and forth between slapstick comedy and heavy tragedy really just is a matter of what do you want the audience to feel and where's the joke. And I love comedy, like I grew up on Bugs Bunny. It's just like you did. So he's still like probably my favorite cartoon character. So I love Looney Tunes stuff. And one of the things that when it came time to do The Boys as a television series, I was asked Kripke, I said, that I recommended that it be funny too. And he agreed with me. He'd already thought about that, but he was kind enough to ask me what I wanted the series to be like. And I was like, can't believe you're asking me. But I said, it needs to be funny. And because otherwise it's just going to be a long, hard slog and people are going to tune out because it gets really dark. And he was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. So we kind of had the same thing with Transmetropolitan, and that, there was a lot of dark moments in that book. And if it didn't make you laugh once in a while, then, plus we loved Hunter S. Thompson, and like I loved how wacky and over the top that guy was. And Warren would just write weird stuff too, but then I would take it and do something with it. And for one of the examples that comes to mind is he kicks a guy out the window, and I think he asked him to look like an adult Charlie Brown. And so I went all the way with it and made him really look like a real life adult Charlie Brown. But when he kicks him out the window, he squashes a puppy or a dog, and he goes, "That's my dinner." Spider just screams out like, "That's my dinner.
Yep.
Don't touch that dog." But I made that dog look like Snoopy, like just as a parody. But that was the fun of that book, is there was just always like Warren's imagination was completely in a world of its own. And I don't know, how do I put this? And I mean this humbly, I could meet him on his energy level. Yeah. And we really got the band going. That's the way it felt.
Follow-up question that we've been wondering this entire series. who hates dogs between you two? Because
Oh, I love dogs. I have
okay.
2 big ones and a cat. So I think it was Warren.
Okay, because it just seems like there's dogs
Yeah,
constantly
no,
on the back foot.
Warren had a ferret and cats, and he liked
Cats, yeah.
cats.
That makes sense. Okay.
But I wouldn't go so far as to put words in his mouth, say he hates dogs, but definitely not me. I love dogs. Absolutely. I love dogs and cats, but
Yeah.
and my dogs and cat get along great. So
It's just a reading that we got out of the book.
Yeah, we
frankly.
thought it was funny. Like
yeah,
and then,
I don't think it's ever anything we really discussed. I tried very much not to step on his toes or get in his way when he was creating. I just tried to capture the fire that he would bring to those scripts.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something that we're reading into the book. Now, here's a question for you. Transmetropolitan, like we said, has been very prescient in a lot of ways. Are there things that people are reading into the book that are wrong, like that?
Well, it's just that Alan Moore thing.
Yeah, but I mean, like in terms of like statements about politics, in terms about the world, like things that you didn't intend for
Well,
it to say.
that's actually an interesting question, because what I didn't know then and has become more and more, it's also like the same with Homelander. There are people that I don't think understand that Spider's not speaking for them or their point of view, but they will grab hold of Spider giving the finger or saying something. And I'm like, no. And Homelander's the bad guy. If you don't get that, you're not paying attention,
yeah.
Like there was a rally and somebody had dressed up as Homelander with a Trump face, and he was carrying around somebody dressed up as Biden in a prison outfit and with a funny mask. And I was like, you guys don't understand that Homelander's the bad guy? Like,
These are the people
Just
that
'cause
misquote 1984. So
exactly. But, in the last, the reason we're not talking about The Boys, but the reason I gave Homelander American Flag Cape was based on the statement or the quote, like, the last bastion of a scoundrel is patriotism,
yeah.
because people that will wrap themselves in the flag. So I literally wrapped Homelander in a flag. But
That's awesome.
Anyway, but that was kind of the thinking I brought to with Transmetropolitan. But what's funny is that I wasn't all that political or politically aware when I started on that book, and Warren really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that I just wasn't paying attention to. And so I always look at that book as sort of like a rebirth for my acuity, because as I read and learned more, or as I was working on that series, I started paying attention more. And the more I started paying attention, the more fire and fury I could bring to Spider. And, to this day, it's like, I'm kind of like, I'm outspoken on social media, but that's because I'm half of Spider Jerusalem, Like, there's a big part of him that he is my spirit animal. Like, I wish I could be as cool and angry and brave as Spider is, but I'm not. But I do it through my work. But but you can always speak up and you can always point out what the truth is, and that should never be in question.
Hell yeah.
Do you think there's aspects of Transmetropolitan that have taken on new meanings since you guys originally created it? Like discussing the first arc, for example, we had a whole question about, like, are the transients in this supposed to have any sort of relation to like trans people today in conversation?
No,
we sort of ruled that they didn't, but
Yeah.
No, not at all. It was really about people getting cosmetic surgery to make themselves look like aliens, because people were actually starting to do that then.
Mm-hmm.
So Warren extrapolated on how far that trend could go, that it becomes a cult,
Yeah. We kind of came to that conclusion, like that because it was less about like your identity so much as like social things.
Yeah, it was literally people that.
But it was interesting,
Yeah, no, that's just a coincidence. I got to be friends with Magdalene Visaggio, who's trans, because she read into that and interviewed me once, and it wasn't until we talked about it that she realized, like, oh no, we're not. She took it that it was anti-trans. I'm like, no, I don't.
Oh.
I didn't remember feeling that way. I mean, we were a lot more. You have to remember too. This book came out in 1997. Right. And just like 80s movies now, there's a lot of stuff that has not aged well out of that era.
Yeah.
But I don't think either Warren and I had a hateful bone in our bodies, and we were definitely championing the underdogs.
No, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, we wasn't so much like that. We were just kind of like the similar name, and then we're kind of like, this is really interesting. Not so much the Fred Christ of it all, you know what I mean? But the
Yeah, I mean, for
people
me,
is what we're
I
talking
think
about.
what he was trying to state, what he was really trying to get a point is how, like, false leaders and cult icons, cult leaders, and how they can start these movements and they get out of control, and the innocent people that get hurt in the midst of it, like
Yeah,
that riot that happens in issue 3. That
Yeah.
was very, very bloody, which is weird because talk about prescient, like it looks like ice now. It looked like the COVID riots and the BLM riots, where
Hmm.
you have all these cops in military gear with, and I was my idea to put submit now on the shields, but I'm like, God, how prescient was that?
yeah.
Like, again, make transmet fiction again.
Right.
I think one of the things that I really like specifically about what we're talking about is
After
these.
9/11, oh, I'm sorry, I'm
Sorry,
just finishing
it's
that
okay.
thought. After 9/11, the militarization of the police became a
Oh yeah,
thing, but I was in the middle of the series when 9/11 happened. I was living in Brooklyn when 9/11 happened. But fun fact, fun story, not really fun, but weird. I was working on a cover for the next issue when the plane hit the tower. I had just gone to bed about 15 minutes before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. But the cover that I had spent the night working on was Spider as like a Godzilla like character kicking over buildings that were collapsing and little people falling through the air. I had spent the whole night leading up to 9/11 drawing that in detail.
wow.
So I went
Jeez.
to bed having finished that cover. My wife woke me. I saw the plane hit, or I saw the New York one with the plane. I said, "Oh well, that was an accident." Went back to bed, like everybody else experienced. But I was in New York. I
Yeah,
have photos out my window of that tower. But then I went back to bed, and then we found a second plane hit. Obviously it was on, and we didn't. There was no more sleep for a couple of days.
right.
But it was so weird to me to this day that of all the things I've drawn for Transmetropolitan, of all the covers I've worked on for that book, that would be the subject matter. That just still gives me the willies.
That's crazy. Yeah, because we actually were talking about the presence of 9/11 in the series and trying to nail down
It,
about when it happened, like when the creative would have been
yeah, it was
impacted.
towards around issue 50. I remember
Yeah,
the issue I had to do really quick because of 9/11 opens with Royce sitting on a bench feeding pigeons, having just lost his job.
I remember that one. Yeah. Okay. The point I was making before is that one thing, because we were talking about the transients, I love that all these alternative lifestyles are introduced, and a lesser storytelling team would have just made them a joke. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
But all these, like the transients, we get this amazing transient character late in the series that plays an integral part in the climax, despite the
Yeah,
fact she doesn't make it out. We get Tico, who's one of Case's favorite characters in the entire thing, that, justifies these cloud people. And there's just like, and the fact that Spider doesn't look down on them, I think is just so cool. Obviously, this is a team
that's
thing. You know what I mean?
that
It's not
is one
just,
of the things that's what made me really, why I still remain very fiercely proud of the series, is because I really loved Spider's humanity. And one of the best, my favorite issue remains Another Cold Morning, where the woman is thawed out and thrown to the
Hmm.
wolves, even though she signed up to be protected, and she kind of claws her way back to humanity, and he kind of stays in touch with her throughout the series. But Mary, the revivalist, like, I
Mhm.
thought that was one of the most interesting takes on the future that we explored, and I love drawing that issue as well. But
I
I thought that
think
was
I can say
fascinating.
for both of us that that's our favorite
Yeah,
issue.
I think that would end up
Yeah,
being
I
our
Yeah.
favorite
get
issue. Yeah.
I get that a lot. I'm surprised that we didn't get more of an award kind of attention on that, but we did for like number 19, Monstering, but or that arc. But it was interesting. But I love that issue, and I just moved to Italy and drew some of those backgrounds. Sitting in the Piazza di Signoria and seeing Italian architecture for the first time. I'd never been to Italy yet. I moved there. Talking about crazy. But now I love it. It's my second home. But that was really fascinating to me to experience that culture shock while drawing that issue, because in a lot of ways, I was going through what that character was going through. I was a fish out of water. I was surrounded by a language I didn't speak. Everything felt like it was moving too fast. I had to learn my way around, the city and how things worked. And this was like all pre-internet, pre-cell phone. Like, it was a very different world there. I go back now and it's like being at home. I can use my phone there. My phone just switches over automatically, and everything's modernized. They were on the Wi-Fi kick before we were.
Right.
So because the payphones worked so badly in Italy back in the 90s, people rushed to get their own private telefonino, which they called it. And so that having that cellular network as the basis for everybody in the cities, they just naturally started spreading out. So Wi-Fi tends to be very good in Italy.
Here's a question I didn't have a note to ask you about, but I realized that we talked a lot about it in the course of the series. As you pointed, this comes in '97. This frankly is coming off of your experience with Malibu, which we talked about how Marvel basically acquired it just to get the color team. What was it like working at this point where like Photoshop and computer graphics and all these things were becoming part of the industry that they hadn't been before?
Yeah, well, I think it just was making, in some cases, I really liked what it did for the work. I liked the more luxurious color because that flat color that we used to have was very limited. And I did all my New Warriors with that old style coloring, and I would do these elaborate things that required flames and water. And it's just, and John Rosas did the best he could with what he did. He wasn't bad at it or anything, but there'd be strange choices that are like, why is that all pink? But they had to really just work with what they had. So I liked that came in. And that's one of the things I liked about working in Malibu when I did, is that they were on the cutting edge of that technology. But for myself, it really didn't affect what I was doing. I was just penciling a comic like any other comic. So I'm not really sure how that applies to Transmetropolitan, except Nathan Irving was very good at his coloring at the time, and he was an essential piece of that team as well.
Yeah, I guess I was just curious because there are things like the effects that were done to make like screens that characters were appearing on.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that would have been, in a lot of cases, that would have been Clem Robbins' department or Nathan's. I'm really not sure, but they would do cutouts in those days. They had to cut that. They got the original art, and it's like pasted down. They shrink things down and paste them. So it wasn't really digital. Like, I didn't see the digital stuff really kick in until about, I don't know, I would say around 2003 is what I really remember. Like, working on Wolverine is when I really started to see the extent of how things were being assembled and the digital impact on how comics were processed and created and looking.
Oh, wow. Yeah, just because there are really good effects going on throughout Transmetropolitan, I assumed that there was more.
That's just talented people
just
that
talented
weren't
people.
Me. and good editors and people that cared. Like, I think everybody that worked on that book had a certain level of passion for it, because it was not an easy project. The deadlines were tight and the industry was a mess. Like, we just come out, like, Marvel had declared bankruptcy. It's like, how insane is that to imagine now?
Yes, I mean, now they've got the sugar daddy or sugar mommy in the form of Disney. So
yeah, but I'm saying, like, at the time, like, you're telling me you can't sell Spider-Man to kids. It's like telling me you can't sell pancakes to starving people. Like, what? That's got to be clearly, somebody goofed.
Certainly a very different era.
Very different era.
So last question I have for you is, looking at the information density that is in Transmetropolitan, from the from the advertisements to the way that things are depicted as like holograms or various types of things, and then comparing that with the way modern media has gotten today, are we cursed? Like, have you created, like, did you predict a timeline that we would just be driven insane by little rectangles everywhere?
I did not know. I mean, that's the irony, is of all the things that we thought up for Transmetropolitan, none of us predicted the iPhone. We kind of had a feel for the internet, but we did not have an idea for the iPhone. Like, so for me, it's like, if you look in issue 1, when he gets to the city, there's people walking around with a lot of headgear. And for me, it's like, that is machines that are doing all the things that an iPhone can do. Like AirPods and an iPhone, and you can watch a movie, you can listen to music, and have your own private internet experience. But I thought, people would put on VR helmets that would have trackers in them, and
Yeah, they
you
put on
could
the Apple
be
Vision
on.
Pros and not the iPhones.
Yeah, you could be on.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have a picture I'll send you, but but the idea that, yeah, the Apple Vision Pro is what those helmets are doing. But I didn't know. It was funny that. Again, I thought I was drawing this outlandish future that was much further away than it ended up being. I didn't think I'd see any of that stuff in my lifetime.
Right.
Especially the collapse of the media and integrity and things like that. Like that's just depressing.
Right. We talked a lot about the political playbook of the Smiler. And we're like, this is disturbingly familiar. Like,
well, what's really funny is that
you know.
every political election cycle, somebody thinks they've found the Smiler. Like, oh, it's this guy, it's that guy, and they get any picture of a smiling politician with a haircut, good haircut on either side of the aisle, and pin the Smiler on him. And like, most recently, they're using Gavin Newsom, and
I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom was, mayor of San Francisco when I was drawing that book, So, no, he was inspired by, Warren's description was Tony Blair with Jimmy Carter's smile. And the idea was that he looked innocuous and he sold himself as like a good guy. And that's certainly what some of the worst politicians do.
So Keith, this is your chance to sort of voice anything that we've sort of missed in terms of talking about the series. It doesn't have to be necessarily a question for Darick. It could just be something that that is coming from you decompressing at this point. Is there anything you've got?
Just I want to gonna express how much I really enjoy the character designs, how unique and distinct they are. One thing we talked about quite a bit is the height difference between the filthy assistants, like, was always really distinct, and it just gave them such character, just that one little thing.
That was important to me that they would have that dichotomy. I like that. I like the idea of a tall and a short,
and just because the two of them,
and plus Shan was supposed to be his bodyguard, so I kind of imagined what was her name? Mira Sorvina at the time was like sort of my physical model for her.
Gotcha. And then just, because like, I mean, I like Spider, but I was here for the filthy assistants. I absolutely adored them the entire run through. And so I just really like that. But then also you mentioned Royce. Royce was great. Just all these characters, even the one or two shot characters that I just immediately clicked with. We talked about the transient late in the series, and we opened this issue with her on the run, and we spend like the first, like, I want to say 10 pages with just her, and just that time of getting to know her and seeing her and this hopeful smile. I was like, this locks you in. This is storytelling.
Thank you.
So yeah, that was like something that really impacted me. So I just wanted to mention that, definitely.
No, I really appreciate that. That is exactly that warms my heart to know that, a lot of times I'd have to do scenes that were quiet, like speaking of Another Cold Morning, like the last 3 pages of that, there's not a single word on it. Yeah. And that was my job to make that, to sell that ending, So if you could feel what Spider's feeling and you were drawn into that moment, then I feel like that was my responsibility. So if the quiet stuff worked, if the characters made you like them and root for them or hate them, that's me trying to tell you what I was doing for Warren. Like, I wanted Warren's story to resonate with you like it resonated with me. I wanted you to love these characters or hate these characters as much as I did.
Yeah, definitely. And it's Spider's book. and there are, several main characters, but it really felt like an ensemble. It really felt like any of
It
these characters
is.
come
It's just
back at
like you
any
said, the
time.
city is a character. I agree
Yeah,
with that. I don't,
yeah,
it's not called Spider Jerusalem. It's called Transmetropolitan.
yeah.
You
But I
know,
I loved that. I just like having this variety of characters. It was great. I really liked it. So yeah, that's
thank
all I
you.
wanted to add. So of
No, I appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for telling me.
course,
Yeah, here's a space just for me to just praise you and thank you again for the work because like I was 16 when I discovered this work and I
Oh,
read it
wow.
I read it through trades initially and then it was like around like issue like 45 or so when I like jumped on the singles and I read it to the end of the book and loved it and this was a series that definitely this is how I got into Hunter S. Thompson and by way of meant that and just other like writing in general and so forth like opened me up to like looking at modern politics and to looking at
Yeah.
the state of the world. So this was a really influential work just in terms of like my like awakening as an adult
Yeah.
into the
Like
world
I
of
said, I kind of had the same experience working on the book. So I
yeah.
feel you.
So thank you for this work and thank you for taking the time to chat with us about it. Like it's been incredible for us to like go on this journey and reread it and to have the light at the end of the tunnel being like in addition to us like reading through this like awesome book, we get a chance to talk to you about it.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a really gratifying thing because I mean, I start to look at the calendar and realize how many years it's been since I was doing that book, and the mirror doesn't lie. But so it's really, I remember being on an airplane and finishing reading, or in the middle of reading Mouse by Art Spiegelman, and at the time, all I was doing was superhero work, and I was literally tears running down my face on an airplane because the work was so profound. And I was like, I want to do something that matters. I want to contribute something that will resonate. And, with my career, I want to do a Watchman. I want to do something like this before I, kick off. And Transmet has stood the test of time. And that's really powerful considering, how many things where you're predicting the future just look silly now, where ours looks eerily on point. And yet there's still something to be, I don't know, almost hopeful about. There's something in that story that remained hopeful, which is why I tried to explain it. It was never a dystopia. It was a modern world with a lot of messed up problems, but it was never a dystopia, And as we go through our own problems in the modern world, it's good to remember this is a passing time. This sucks right now. But, I'm sure the people that were in the midst of the Civil War back when were pretty upset watching Atlanta burn, you know. So this is our time in the hot seat, And my father had me late in life. He was a World War II veteran, and something he always reminded me of is like the pendulum swings. So don't get too hung up on anything. It will go another direction because human beings have been doing this dance for far too long. And, there was once a time when Rome was a mighty empire, and now it's a great place to get pizza, you know. Once was a time if you went to Berlin, you wouldn't be able to go through, you'd have to go through checkpoints. Now it's one of the friendliest cities I've visited. It's a lovely city. And, the Germans are lovely people, but once upon a time, and not that long ago. Yeah. So it's happening to us now. And the other problem with life and getting philosophical at the end here, but the problem with time and if you don't, the truest thing is like, if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. And what people take for granted at this era is that we had it really good for a long time in America. And I think we got lazy, and I think we got easily manipulated into not really knowing what went into making the country what it was. And some people have figured out how to exploit that by actually sadly going after the people with probably really good hearts and good intentions, not knowing where their blind spots are. And it's important to not have your own. And it's also important to remember that, we're all in this together, regardless of what hat you wear. And that is the essence of what I think comes through in Transmetropolitan, is that through the worst of it, Spider's main beacon, his rallying cry is, this is really happening. This is the truth. And the prescient tagline of like, in the future lies the truth and the truth is obsolete. You know, we are living through that time, but it's our time. We're adults. We've got kids. Our parents were just as freaked out when they were going through their time. And their parents were freaked out when it was their time. There was always some kind of crazy shit happening in the world that they had to contend with and worry about, like, is this going to be the last generation? Will there be a tomorrow? You know, and in that regard, that's what makes Transmetropolitan kind of appealing. It's like, oh, hey, there is a future. You know, it's weird and it's fucked up, but it's there. We're all still around. There's still people. There's still cities. You can, you know, your octopus pizza might taste a little weird, but you can get pizza.
Yeah.
You know, it might be cloned cheese, but you can get pizza, you know.
Yeah, with caribou eyes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Bucket of them. You know, and maybe those things are delicious. Have you ever had a caribou eye? You know.
Can't say I have.
No, can't say.
Can't say I haven't. I had a sheep's eye once with Warren, but that's another story.
Well, Darick, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us about Transmetropolitan.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Thanks. I really appreciate that you guys are, you know, your passion for my old work is very heartwarming. And I'm glad that you guys got something out of it, especially knowing that Keith has just read it for the first time, that it resonated with him in some way. It's very, very gratifying. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this has been my chance to be an evangelist for the series. So,
outstanding. Preach on, brother.
Yeah. So where can people find you and follow you these days?
Well, if you want to hear me bitch about politics, I'm over on Blue Sky doing that every morning. But I have a website, DarickRobertson.com. You can go get a hold of me for commissions or original art. You can contact me through there. And I'm working on a brand new series with Tom Taylor called Necretaceous for Vertigo Comics. It should be out later this year. I'm very excited about it. I think it may be the best first issue I've ever drawn. So they've given me lots of rope to hang myself with, and I appreciate it. And Tom is an excellent collaborator, but I don't have to brag about Tom. He created Deceased and won the Eisner last year. So we know how talented Tom is.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, people should absolutely check out everything you've got going on. They should check out your website. They should commission you if they have the means, because you're awesome. And so thank you again for coming on.
And I'm still a working man. So yes. Get a hold of me about commissions.
Yeah.
Despite what you might think, not rich. Okay.
Keith, where can people find you and follow you?
Yeah. So the best place to find me is going to be on Blue Sky as well. You can find my account for my comic book review podcast, We Have Issues, at wehaveissues.bsky.social. And you can also find my personal account at keithhasissues.bsky.social. And so make sure to check it out on there. I'll be certainly reviewing Darick's new book because I'm doing all the new Vertigo stuff. So expect a review there.
Okay. I think you're going to like it.
Yeah, I bet you already described enough for me to already like it. So
it's good stuff. If you like an ensemble cast, you got a good one coming. So
awesome.
We're working hard at making them interesting, and Tom's been thinking about this one for a long time, so it really shows.
And then the only other place to find me is on Instagram, which is We Have Issues Pod, because someone took my account name. So make sure to follow us on there because we are starting to use that a little bit more. Other than that, the only other place you could find me would be on our Discord, which I think Case is going to tell us about right now.
Yeah, the Discord server for certain POV media is a great place to come chat with us. You can find a link in our show notes or in the description of the episodes. Or if you go to certainpov.com, you can find a link and come chat with us on Discord directly. It's a great place. Even Darick is technically part of our server because I forced him to join it long ago for an interview. So you could even theoretically ping him. But come and hang out and chat with us because it's a great place. If you don't feel like using the Discord thing for the social media stuff for me, you can find me on most social media platforms at Case Aiken, with the exception of Instagram, where I'm holding on for dear life for my AIM screen name from high school, which was Quetzalcoatl 5, Quetzalcoatl 5. As you can tell, I was pretentious in high school by evidence of the fact that I was obsessed with Transmetropolitan. So check me out there. Check out the Patreon for the network. Patreon.com/certainPOV media. You can join and support and make shows like this a thing. And if you support at our executive producer level, you get a shout out at the end of every episode. So we have a couple of people to thank at the end of this episode, which is our executive producers, and that is Micah McCaw, Carter Hallett, Sean Muir, Lee Greger, Memento Young, Logan Crowley, Joe Mastropiero, Casey and Nancy Aiken, Adam Samter, and Keith Lettinen. Bum, 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 bum.
That's me.
You can be like these awesome people and join at the executive producer tier. But honestly, even if you join the Patreon at the free tier, I am doing a nerdy essay a week, and then also a D&D essay a week. And so that's awesome free content, even at the free tier. But like I said, if you help keep the lights on, that's great. Since the last episode that we recorded, I have had a baby. So so
Your wife must have been very surprised.
yeah, I know.
Out of nowhere.
out of nowhere, like Athena bursting from no, Robbie is great, but it is difficult having kids, and it is difficult being a podcaster with a family. So so anything you can do to make it easier for us to keep this going would be appreciated. Aside from that, check out the stuff that we've got going on at certainpov.com. We've got tons of great shows. We Have Issues is a great show. The shows that I host are also awesome. There's Men of Steel. We interviewed Darick about that a long time ago. There's Another Pass, which is a movie analysis show that I host. But both of those are going great. We've got Trade School, which is a love letter to comics, where each episode a guest host comes on and talks for 5 to 15 minutes about a comic book trade paperback that they love, and why they loved it. That's a great series that is just about promoting comic books as a whole, and yeah, so
much fun.
Yeah, it's just a great old time. But otherwise, yeah, appreciate you being on this ride. Appreciate everyone for checking out The Word from Tomorrow. But that said, this has been that adventure. This has been The Word from Tomorrow. Have a great week.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.